Hello and welcome to the India Hangout. What a waste is this, the title of a new CRISIL report. I'm joined now by CRISIL Chief Economist DK Joshi. We're talking about food wastage. The big question is, why is it happening? What are we doing to prevent it, if at all, and what can be done to fix it? Let's first understand the larger nature of the problem, and we've got lots of questions coming in as well. Why is there so much food wastage in India today, and what is the impact of this?
Well, I think food wastage is, if you see the newspaper headlines or TV headlines, there's always, once in a while, there's a news of so much of grain being eaten by rats. That is the wastage, that mechanism for wastage that we have created. And it's also a waste that so much of food grain is lying there unutilized, whereas the food grain inflation is going up. So that is one aspect of it. Then this wastage aspect shows up more in the perishable stuff, like fruits and vegetables. And there, I think there have been a number of estimates. We ourselves had estimated that the wastage in fruits and vegetable is around 30%. And I think ICRIA had estimated that 15 to 20% wastage takes place in the mandis because there's not adequate infrastructure. So this food does get wasted. And unlike, I just wanted to make a point here, that unlike the western part of the world where the food gets wasted after it reaches the consumer, here the food gets wasted before it reaches the consumer. So the problem is from the farm to the fork.
Right. For instance, I think you've quoted a UN report in this, or a World Bank report, in the saying that 80% wastage in Southeast Asia, 39% in North America.
That's right.
But you're saying the distinction is that 80% is before and North America is mostly after.
No, most of the wastage in the developing countries like India takes place before the food reaches the end consumer. So that is why there's an opportunity. That is a wastage of excess. I mean, in the sense that you have so much of food that you can't finish it.
So, and why has this been happening for so long, and why have we not been able to fix it for so long, or even reduce the margin of error?
Well, we haven't taken any steps in that direction. I mean, what we came out with the APMC Act to protect the farmer, which was a good initiative at that time, but it has outlived its requirement because
Agriculture Produced Marketing Committee.
And I think that is being manipulated by commission agents, traders, etc. For their own gains. So if you look at the difference between what the farmer gets and what the end consumer pays, the farmer doesn't get too much, the end consumer pays too high, and somewhere in between somebody is making the money. And so that mechanism has to be dismantled. And then I think that is one aspect of it, which is the marketing part. The second is you don't have adequate storage infrastructure. I mean, we all know that the situation is quite pathetic as far as the storage of food is concerned. Whether it is the logistics or it is the cold chains, I think there is huge requirement for investment there.
Right. So the question we were asking is wastage fueling food inflation? Now, food inflation is of course split into many aspects, right? There is different types of food, and there's fruits and vegetables and so on. So what's causing the real push, or what's kicking it up?
See, wastage also reduces the supply, so it does pressurize food. If fruits and vegetable inflation is at close to 14-15% in the last 2 years, then I think there has to be some reason for that, and the reason is not just the lack of supply. I think the fruits and vegetable production has also risen. It's that there is wastage, and because of wastage you're not able to reach it out to the end consumer. You're not able to process it also. So one way of curbing wastage is to process it right at the source.
Right.
I think even that is not happening. So that is why I think it's adding to scarcity, so to say.
Okay. So let's take some comments from Pradeep Maheshwari, and he says that wastage can be saved with faster reach to market for perishable goods by train now. He also says that wastage can be reduced by offering 3 to 6 to 12-month grains under food security bill. Then he says PDS system management must with IT firms to keep data so as to prevent fraud. And he also says inflation control by cheaper movement and distribution of food and faster
So this is both. I think this is elongating the shelf life of the product as well as reducing pilferage. I think he's basically talking of these two things. I agree. I mean, so how you do it, with how much technology you use, how much, but I think some basic physical infrastructure requires to be created. I mean, that is where government will have to step in.
Right. So let's come back to the constituents of food inflation and what's driving up prices, right? So why is it that in two cases, eggs, fish and meat, and milk production, the inflation has been dramatic? Is it to do with production of milk and milk products and eggs, fish and meat, or is it something else that's driven it? We're talking about 10 to 15% in each case.
That's right. I think this is demand outstripping supply. See, what has happened in the last few years, GDP growth has dramatically gone up. So people's incomes have risen. People are demanding more of these items. And also what happened was that we gave push to rural wages. So the demand also accelerated because of that. See, typically the tendency is that once your incomes go up, you start moving away from carbohydrates towards proteins. I mean, that is a well-observed phenomena. And whether it is the supply of milk, eggs, or fish, this is clearly a case of supply not keeping pace with the rising demand.
But in your report, you say that to be sure, for foods such as proteins, demand has outstripped supply as incomes grew faster, with GDP growing at 7.6%.
Right.
But you're saying that's not the case with cereals such as rice and wheat, where inflation has remained high despite excess food stocks.
Absolutely, that is where I think the government needs to intervene. I mean, or rather, not intervene too much. I mean, let me put it this way: why is it that you have so much excess food grains and still the rice and wheat inflation is so high? Because you're not releasing it into the system. And I think there are issues with that. You can't release it because you procured it at a certain price, and I think and you have also incurred carrying costs on that. The carrying costs and the storage costs are about 50 to 60% of the original procurement price. So you've added further costs to that. And I think there has to be intervention in the market, and government, rather than letting it rot, has to, in a dynamic manner, intervene. It's not that when I want to intervene, I'll intervene. I think you look at the requirement, and it has to be a dynamic granary kind of a concept, I think, should evolve.
So when you say dynamic granary, that means what? Consistent
daily
responses?
Absolutely. I mean, short-term responses. I mean, we have seen many.
So what's preventing us from doing that now?
I mean, for instance, suppose we have a shortage and we have to import. By the time you take permission and I think get everybody together and it gets clearance, it's already the global prices have gone up. I think so. Decision making.
So who or what is the biggest bottleneck there?
It is the decision-making process, I think, which is.
So is that Food Corporation of India, Ministry of Agriculture?
I think it's the government that has to take a decision and has to lay out a process that this is how it will operate. It should operate on commercial terms. I mean, in the sense that it should operate as and when the demand is there, and there should be more freedom accorded to people who are taking decisions.
Okay. So amongst the 4 or 5 suggestions that you've given in your report, you've talked about abolishing the APMC because that's the layer where the price jump happens.
That's right.
Or sharp price jumps happen. You've talked about increasing protein supply, crop diversification, supply chain, which is a general problem. You've talked about moderating the increase in minimum support prices.
See, what happens is, I mean, if you look at the state like Punjab, it is growing rice, wheat, and I think Punjab has a water issue, and rice is a water guzzler, and still you are growing rice because you have assured income. I mean, the farmer knows that he will get the minimum support price. There is no price risk for him. And in agriculture, I think one of the biggest risks is the price risk. The price might drop. So I think by artificially keeping the price higher or giving him the minimum support, I think you are encouraging him to keep growing the same crop, which is not required in the economy because you already have excess.
But does the farmer have an option to shift to something else? Because that
then there has to be an incentive to do that. I mean, and he has to be incentivized to grow oilseeds, where we have huge import dependency right now. He has to be incentivized to move into fruits and vegetables. And by the way, Punjab, the productivity yield growth has been very low because you keep growing that because you have assured income there.
Right.
And I think so. This MSP might be justified because the cost of production is going up, but I think what it is also creating is it's distorting the cropping pattern. I mean, particularly that is visible very clearly in the case of Punjab.
Right. What about proteins? I mean, now as we said, we started out by saying that the nature of consumption has changed.
Yes.
As incomes have gone up, people are consuming more protein-led food. So how does the government step into this, and can the government step into this?
Well, I think there are various suggestions offered. I mean, one is obviously you have to increase the supply. So you can either increase domestic production or you can start importing. I mean, so you have to have a mix of both, because if you just open up the imports, then you will become import dependent. I mean, and then I think that the domestic producer will also be disincentivized because the prices will sharply come down. Now, I think so you have to have another not green but white revolution. I mean, for milk. I mean, so milk demand is rising very fast. Poultry, etc., I think is still struggling because of that the viral that had hit the poultry. I think the stock is yet to be replenished. So I think you need to. I think Dr. Ashok Gulati was pointing out in one of the programs that there is 100% import duty on drumsticks, the chicken drumsticks. So if you reduce it to maybe 40-50%, then the domestic prices will also stabilize. So some duty reduction, as well as at the same time concrete steps to shore up domestic production.
Right. So I'm going to come back and come back to the larger question in a second. Some more pointers from Pradeep, who's been actively tweeting to us. He says direct dispatch from MSP center to buyers can avoid storage.
Well, if that is possible, I mean, which means your response time has to be reduced, and then you have to be very dynamic. I mean, and I think that will require technology as well. I mean, to access.
Okay. He also says food inflation can be controlled by better crop mix and systematic irrigation facilities. Or is that a too general a point?
I don't. I mean, I'm not pretty clear.
You're not an agriculturalist.
Yeah, so I don't know. But yeah, I think crop mix I can understand. Crop mix means you move from food grains towards the crops which are in short supply.
Right. So let's come back to the larger question, and as part of the supplement to the larger question, what has been the impact of monsoons? We are led to believe sometimes that if the monsoons are good, crops are good, output is good, and therefore inflation should be under control and all the rest of it. Whereas we've had, when monsoons fail, it impacts us very badly. Yeah. That's not your finding.
Well, I think you look at last year. Let's not go too far. I mean, last year was a good monsoon year, but look at food inflation. It was the highest in the last 4 years. Particularly in the month of November, the food inflation touched 14.5%. So even in a good monsoon year, you can see food inflation spiking. And this has been the case. Food inflation has consistently stayed high, despite the fact that you have had good monsoons and bad monsoons, which means that there is some persistence. Either I think these shocks are not random. I think there is a persistent element in food inflation. There can be different drivers, but the tendency of food inflation to stay high is not because of monsoons alone. Monsoons give it an extra leg up, but even with normal monsoons, you see food inflation.
And to that extent, we've hedged ourselves against bad monsoons because our fertilizers, our technology, or of maybe harvesting or seeding is all changed and improved.
Well, I think we have, to some extent, we have hedged, but we are still very, very exposed, because I think the southwest monsoon is still very critical, not only from the food perspective, food grain output perspective, but also from the perspective of drinking water and many other things. I mean, there are issues related to if you get a drought. I think there are issues related to animals and so on. I think it's a big pain right now. So we have not been able to de-link ourselves from the vagaries of monsoons. Some states have. I mean, Punjab, Haryana don't get impacted because they have very good irrigation coverage, but there are many other parts which have much lower irrigation coverage and are exposed.
Right. So if we were to address the larger question, and at this point of time, because inflation is one reason why, let's say, there was discontent and that led to a change of government and so on, or at least one of the, I mean, amongst many other reasons.
That's right.
So what can the system or the government do to start addressing the problem of high inflation, and where could it begin?
Well, let's start with food grains. Food grain is very simple. Start releasing I think I'm not saying flood the markets and completely.
But that's not so much a physical problem as there seems to be a conceptual opposition.
It is. I think there's no physical problem. There's no shortage, so to say. So that is one. And fruits and vegetables will be more sticky, but at least you have to start making the right steps, because even if you start.
No, but we have not released food grains into the market because we conceptually believe that that's a wrong thing to do.
Well, maybe because if the prices come down, maybe it will be detrimental to farmers. I don't know. I think that's nobody wants to take such decisions. I mean,
okay, but the economist in you feels that it can be done.
I think from an economic perspective, yes. I think and it will, because high inflation also is a tax on the poor. I mean, you forget that. I mean, at the same time, you're keeping prices artificially high. Somebody is paying a tax of that. I mean, it's a tax for something.
So you're saying start releasing food grains.
I think that is something that you can quickly do. And then as far as proteins, etc. is concerned, maybe some concessions on imports or reduction of duties might help. But I think I also want to say that you need to shore up your domestic. I think you can't be completely becoming import dependent. You need to trade strategically, and I think that is what you can do in the case of in the case of some of the protein elements, because protein is excess in many parts of the world. And the fruits and vegetables I think is more to do with logistics and so on. But in the short run, you can at least start processing food. And I think the food habits are also changing. The urbanites are getting more and more attuned to processed food. So if you notice, inflation in processed food is much lower than inflation in the raw food, because it allows you to, if you have excess, you can the storage life improves. I mean, and that allows you to hedge against shortages.
Right. So fruits and vegetables, taking that as an example, I mean, your report says there's been 70,000 crore rupees of wastage in 2010-11. Yeah. So presumably it's maybe shifting up and down, but not much.
Yeah.
So why are we seeing such gigantic losses?
Well, it is because I think because of the lack of logistics, lack of storage, etc. And I think these are all perishable. Some of the vegetables go bad very quickly, and we have seen it in onions, and in many cases. I mean, there are many examples.
And we are not able to obviously calibrate demand output, because there is in some cases there is a minimum support price being paid for it and so on.
Well, I think minimum support price is more to do with food grains, but I think fruits and vegetables are out of.
Yeah, they're out of it. So then why are we not able to calibrate output?
Well, I think it's because it's the spikes. I mean, sometimes even if there is a small shock, it is manipulated because you have too much of intermediaries in the system. They manipulate it much more than the benefit doesn't go to the farmer that much.
Okay.
And I think so that is why the APMC becomes. I think you need robust markets and you need good linkages. Infrastructure linkages from farmer to those markets. I think if you do that, I think you can definitely check. And also, I think people should be allowed to directly contract with farmers. I mean, let a market develop. Don't artificially choke the market.
So to come back, you said releasing food grains is one key step.
That's right.
What's the next key step?
Next step is, I think, give impetus to food processing. I think at least that is what you can do.
And we hear that every budget for so many
years. We have been hearing for so long, and I think, and that is, and as I said, even people in India are getting amenable to processed food. I mean, you can use the tomato puree instead of fresh tomato, and I think that. And even the onions can be powdered. So there are many ways of, but I think eventually it is the storage and logistics that we need to work on.
Right. So you were telling me that your team tracked a sack of tomatoes from
that was some years back.
Yeah.
I think we figured out that that out of 100 kgs that goes from the farm, only 73 reaches the end consumer.
And what was the price jump?
Price jump is, I think, I don't remember the number, but it is quite significant. I mean, it's visible in anything you pick up. I mean, you pick up a coconut in Kerala, by the time it reaches Mumbai or Delhi, it is multiple times. It's not the transport cost alone,
right.
And it's not the storage cost alone. It's somebody else in between who's eating up, and it's pretty well understood. I mean, I've myself experienced that what you get from the farm is much cheaper than what you get in the retail, much cheaper. So
right, and clearly we have a big challenge ahead. Here's one more question. Inflation is one thing, but what is sad is that when hunger, malnutrition continues to haunt us, food keeps getting wasted.
Yeah, that's a irony. I mean, that's something which I think which should concern everyone, because you have excess, and at the same time hunger exists, and it's getting wasted.
Right, and this is something, as we said, the government needs to look at very urgently, because this is a root cause of discontent amongst citizens or residents of this country.
I think even from a macroeconomic perspective, it's causing high inflation and causing instability in the system. So it's a tax on poor. I think it causes macroeconomic instability. I think you need to enter into a stable and low inflation regime.
Right, and food is where you must begin.
Food is where you have to begin. There's agriculture can't wait, as they say.
Right. Thank you so much, D.K. Joshi, for joining us. What a waste, the CRISIL report on how to tackle the challenges of food wastage and food inflation, and how that links up to some very fundamental problems in the economy. Thanks for watching on this India Hangout. We'll be back.